now begin discussion on the deliberative motions. I remind the Chamber that during these motions you do not debate as government or opposition, and instead you are asked to contribute to the discussions based on your own perspective and ideas. As such, anybody may seek the call to speak when I ask for it. After 15 minutes of discussion, we will open up the opportunity to amend, or in other words, change the motion. A maximum of 3 amendments may be proposed and voted on due to the time limits. To facilitate this, if you're moving an amendment, 4 other people must second your motion before you may deliver your speech of a maximum of 60 seconds. We will permit 1 other member to speak against the amendment for a maximum of 1 minute, and if time permits, we may permit 1 additional member to speak on that amendment. Votes on the amendment shall be conducted by a show of hands. If the amendment has passed, then discussion will continue on the motion as amended. The Chamber shall now discuss the first deliberative motion that reads, this House, A, notes that the big issues young South Australians care deeply about, such as intergenerational poverty, climate change, youth unemployment, and mental health, have not been adequately tackled by the short-term decisions made by previous generations. B, acknowledges the challenges faced by policymakers responding to intergenerational global issues like the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change, and the need to look beyond short-term solutions. C, notes the lack of intergenerational consideration regarding new and future policy development in South Australia. D, acknowledges the need to work together to give current and future generations a good quality of life by thinking about long-term impacts of new policy and legislation. E, recommends a statewide consultation process with children, young people, community members, and policy developers for new and future policies. And F, recommends instituting a future generations bill, which ensures the intergenerational sustainability, well-being, and transparency of new policies developed in South Australia. You can find this deliberative motion on page 18 of your bill. I call upon the first speaker. So that could be anyone. I call upon the honourable member.
Yeah. Such discussion about the short-term decisions and the lack of intergenerational consideration of policy development and making has really put us in a really good predicament when such world events such as the pandemic comes about, because it means that a lot of the climate targets and a lot of the headway that we're trying to make on important issues to South Australians have to be delayed in order to deal with current world situations. And if the sustainability of these policy developments was maintained to ensure that following generations could continue building upon the goals and making sure that they have an adequate outline to follow, these issues wouldn't be as great when worldwide, I guess, a tragic event as is happening at the moment hits.
Yeah. Thank you, honourable member. I call upon speaker.
Sort of unsure, yeah. So, it's the speaker that I'm aligned as.
Yeah.
I very much echo Lois's statements. I think this lack of consideration for intergenerational impacts of the decisions made in Parliament, I believe is a harmful mentality that's pushed by a lot of political parties, which has resulted in some very poor decision making that prioritises the livelihood of the parties and the members in Parliament until this next election or until whenever they're replaced in seated. And rather than longevity of South Australians, they're not prioritising South Australia in the long run. And this has resulted in a lot of stunted progress and a lot of movements and a lot of policies that have been trying to go through, things being undone, redone as new elections go by and new parties come in and out. There's constant delays and unsustainable progress. And I think it's time that Parliament wants to recognise to look beyond their lifetimes, because for a lot of issues regarding things beyond us, beyond the next 5 years, beyond the next upcoming election, they will never be solved. They continue to overlook up until the next election and not actually look into actually solving these problems with not just mere band-aid solutions that look good on your candidate marketing program.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I call upon the Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Rick Hall. One of the main issues with this is our government doesn't want to address youth unemployment or underemployment. Instead, they want to appease what they believe are the bigger demographics in their constituents. They seem to forget that the youth or the young are, even though not all of us can vote, are still part of the constituents and need a voice to improve our lacking numbers in the state. In this state, we are the highest underemployment and unemployment in youth. Appalling, and we need to try and change it. Thank you.
Thank you. I call upon a Speaker. The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaker. The Honourable Trustee Humphrey. So I very much agree with the fact that South Australians are not so much beginning, but do care deeply about intergenerational poverty, climate change, youth unemployment. And climate change has become a tremendous focus of youth today. We've had even talks in the UN, political worldwide talks which outline emission targets for countries around the world. And many countries around the world took this as an opportunity to meet their quota, the bare minimum agenda to satisfy the goal that was set for them, instead of taking that initiative and really setting their own goals and showing us that they care. A lot of policies being passed, particularly through SA Parliament, I don't really hear about unless I hear about it on the news. We aren't particularly connected to what happens in our state parliament as much as we are maybe on the federal level. And I'd be very interested to know what South Australia, with its massive tuna export and coal mining and mining industries, might be doing to reduce emission targets and really tackle corporate growth. Every year we see population multiply again and again and again as people have babies, not to reference the last bill, but we might have to read it. Because if we don't see change occur on the local level, we can't push it on a global scale. We need to focus on what happens in our community. We need to be more aware of what happens within our state. And perhaps even as a generation, and this is a criticism on us too, more involved and invested in our political process. To be able to go to our local members and say, oi, why don't I see this happen? And I'd very much like to see something like that set up for us.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I call upon the Speaker. The Honourable Member with the red button.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable George Donegal. I completely 100% agree with what was just expressed by the Honourable Member. I think that time and time again, governments, especially the South Australian government, are just being filled by the same type of people and the same type of generations. And I get that they have experience, and that's totally fine. But at the same time, it just feels that like youth issues just get constantly pushed to the bottom of the pile, and it's just starting to get worse. These issues like youth employment just keeps growing, like youth mental health, the statistics just keep growing. And it's like, when are they going to give us a chance to have a voice and have a say in like actual policy? And you know, it would be fantastic because it
minister that's like actually a young person.
We're involved.
Involved in like advising the youth minister, even if the youth minister is someone from electorate. Something like that would just be awesome. Like there's a UN youth representative to the actual United Nations. Why not something like that, but for a government? I think the only way we can kind of address this intergenerational issues that we're having is to like involve intergenerations in the government.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I call upon speakers. The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Dante McDonald.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, when our politicians get it wrong, we cop it. Mr. Speaker, when they make decisions that are driven by their own interests in retaining position, winning an election, or pleasing an ever-shrinking base, we cop it. Mr. Speaker, decisions made like this see young people and young South Australians unemployed with poor mental health on an earth that's dying. Mr. Speaker, I call upon our representatives to make decisions with us and our children and our children's children in mind. Mr. Speaker, I commend this motion to the House and I ask my fellow youth parliamentarians to pass it.
I thank the Honourable Member. I call upon Speaker. The Honourable Ben.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Ned Teamer. I'd like to open up with two quotes. One from Charles Darwin. It's not the strongest of species that survives, not the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. The other quote I'd like to do is, the most terrifying words a person can ever hear is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. The problem with Parliament, the problem with all of these things, is people invest too much power in them. People think they are the only way for anything to ever be solved. You know what? If you truly believed in solving something, go out, fix it yourself. If you want to solve climate change, how about you sell your house, go buy some things, go invest in a green corporation. Not just sit there, go and buy Macca's, which pollutes hundreds of tons of CO2, then go and buy your iPhone. I find it disgusting and I find it sickening how people will constantly go on about how they love these things, how they love these ideas, and never preach them themselves. No, everyone always thinks, oh, let's get Big Daddy government to do it for me. Never accomplished anything. All the greatest atrocities in human history have been committed by the government. There are very few things in the annals of history which can unapologetically be called good that the government has ever done. It's always been done by private charities, private individuals, and individuals such as yourselves who willingly stand up and do it for themselves. This is why I believe we should cut out the government. This motion, all it does is give more idea. It's a placetate. It's a way of saying, oh, here's a small thing for you. Here's something that makes you happy, so we can continue doing whatever the hell we want. Here we go. Continue to destroy the environment. Continue to destroy the economy. I just find it disheartening. I just find it upsetting. How little responsibility people and how little will people have to take the power into their own hands. So I want everyone here to listen. I want also ministers, whoever's watching, take the power into your own hands. Do what you think is right. Ignore party political lines. Ignore government policy. Do what you think is right.
Thank the Honourable Member. I call upon Speaker. The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lachlan, please. I'd just like to echo some of the points made by members in this House. Obviously, unemployment, especially youth unemployment, is incredibly important, as we have seen. Once again, members working from election to election, certain political parties and governments disregarding young people, especially young people that don't have a vote and that aren't members of other political parties. We have seen time and time again the violation of workers, particularly young workers' rights, who don't have the opportunity to be able to stand up for themselves. The role of the government is to create jobs for future generations, and I think that our government should really stand up to address youth unemployment and find some programs to help with youth unemployment and give youth people a voice. Young people a voice, particularly during the coronavirus fallout. The role of Youth Parliament is to make a real difference in the parliamentary procedure, and I hope that Part E, that all members in this House really consider Part E of this motion and give young people a voice to Parliament. Now, I know that I'm echoing other members' statements that have said it much better than I, but I guess it really shows that young people really care about this motion, and I hope the government is taking notice.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I call upon the Speaker. Go.
I really want to speak in the Honourable Claire term. I really want to support this motion by citing the energy crisis we in South Australia experienced just a few years ago. This was caused, as was touched on by the Honourable Mara and others here, by the cycle of parliaments who, despite being aware of the ticking clock, ignored the issue, youth, voices, and the consequences of this situation. For almost 60 years, parliamentarians and parliaments continued to ignore this issue, putting band-aid solutions on this problem, and we all saw the consequences. We took the fall for that. Just because we are small in size as youth in this nation does not mean we are small in spirit.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I call upon the Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Representative.
The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the weaknesses of chronic short-term decisions made by government. As young people, we will have to face a lot of the long-term consequences, both health and economic. It is very frustrating because it feels like young people are locked out of the decision-making process, yet we will have to take a lot of the consequences.
The Chamber will now move into amendments. I am in control of the Chamber.
Okay, just a reminder for the amendments. You may stand up, move the amendment. 4 other people will need to second the amendment before we consider it, just to ensure there's significant support. If 4 other people do second your amendment, then you may speak on it for up to 60 seconds. Is there anybody who wishes to move an amendment to the motion? The Honourable Jade Kerwood.
Thank you, Chair. The Honourable Jade Kerwood.
I move to amend subsection A to read, this House notes that the big issues young South Australians about such as intergenerational poverty, climate change, youth employment and mental health conditions and challenges have not been adequately tackled by the short-term decisions made by previous generations. This is essentially adding three words after mental health to conditions and challenges.
Is the motion seconded?
I second the motion.
Okay, that was definitely more than full. Would the member like to speak as to why they would like this amendment?
Thank you, Chair. The Honourable Jade Kerwood. I propose this amendment to ensure those discussing this motion refrain from using words such as sickness and illness in relation to mental health. Let's give a more positive outlook and open mind towards mental health to open those help those who struggle to feel more comfortable talking about their past challenges and conditions. It helps move others to view mental health as something that can be managed rather than a disease. I urge everyone here to vote in favour of this amendment to help continue the movement towards an open-minded and supported society.
I thank the Honourable Member. Question is that the motion, that the amendment be agreed to. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hands. The amendment has been passed. The Part A of the motion will be amended to include the words conditions and challenges after the word mental health. Is there another member who would like to move the amendment? Yes, the Honourable Tyson Buckridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this House amends the motion of big issues young South Australians care deeply about, such as intergenerational poverty, climate change, youth unemployment, and mental health issues and challenges. Conditions and challenges have not been adequately tackled or made transparent enough by the short-term decisions made by previous generations.
I second the motion.
Motion's been seconded. Would the member like to speak to the amendment?
That pretty much speaks for itself. But clearly the youth of South Australia really need to know what's happening within their Parliament House. We need to know the decisions that have been made on the state level, that we may be informed enough to really act on our local administrators and local councils to really drive change in our areas. Make that change more accessible to us.
I thank the honourable member. Question is that the amendment be accepted. All those in favour, raise your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hands. The amendment has been accepted. The words "all made transparent enough" will be added to Part A. Is there another member who would like to move an amendment? Yes, the Honourable Georgia Dartmoor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Honourable Georgia Dartmoor. I wish to move an amendment to add a subsection G, which states, recommends the appointment of a youth advisor to the Government of South Australia.
So could you repeat that slowly?
Sorry, I'd say recommends the appointment of a youth advisor to the Government of South Australia.
Thank you. The question is, the motion be seconded?
I second the motion.
That was everybody.
I did that plus second that.
Would the member like to speak to the amendment?
I think it's pretty clear that we need a young person actually stepping foot into Parliament and telling the government as it is what the youth are actually going through, rather than having to have our voices go through commissioners or go through advisory groups and just have our words on a piece of paper. I think our words need to be heard by politicians from a young person who is advising them on issues that affect youth, because I feel that that's the only way that we are going to be able to get all of these issues to actually be mentioned in Parliament and actually be implemented as proper change in the South Australian society.
I thank the honourable member. The question is that the amendment be accepted. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Any opposed, please raise your hands. Is your hand still up, Mr. Pope?
No, someone get a bucket.
Unfortunately, there appears to be a leak in the room. The amendment has been accepted. A subsection G will be added that recommends an appointment of a youth advisor to the Government of South Australia. I know we said at the start that we would only permit 3 amendments. I believe there are still a few more, and I think this is really valuable discussion, so we'll accept a couple more. Is there anybody else who would like to move an amendment? The Honourable Claridge.
I move that this House holds this motion to include, so it's H now, acknowledges youth as the primary members of our society who will bear the consequences of new and future policies.
Could you repeat the last part?
Bear the consequences of new policies.
Is the motion seconded?
I second the motion.
Motion has been seconded. Would the member like to speak to the amendment?
I think, thank you, Chair. I think the members that spoke earlier in this motion have already explained the issue for me. It really is important that just because we are not old enough to sit in Parliament itself, we are able to enforce or encourage them to look towards the future and who may be around to bear the consequences of it.
Question is that the amendment is accepted. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Any opposed, please raise your hands. The amendment has been accepted. Subsection H will now be added, which says acknowledges youth as the primary members of society who will bear the consequences of new and future policies. Are there any more amendments that would like to be raised? Jesse Rich.
Thank you, Chair. Your Honourable Jesse Rashid. I move that this House amend subsection F. This House recommends instituting a future generations bill which ensures the intergenerational sustainability, well-being and transparency of new policies developed in South Australia, with young people directly involved in its creation.
Is the motion seconded? Would the member like to speak to the amendment?
Thank you, Chair. Your Honourable Desiree. This just ensures that we stop the constant cycle that we all have been discussing today about no consideration for young people by politicians, and whether this involvement be by a committee or the youth law pertaining to the youth advisor, level involvement in decisions and bills needs to be made sure is present here due to its direct implication in future generations.
The honourable member. Is the amendment accepted? Please raise your hands. Anybody against the amendment? Please raise your hands. The amendment has been accepted. Is there anybody else who would like to move the amendment? The honourable Ned Tima.
Mr. Chair, the Honourable Ned Tima. I move to add a section that says that additional education shall be given towards students in primary and secondary education towards historical, philosophical, political, and economic and social issues from a variety of perspectives. Thank you.
Is the motion seconded? Yep, the motion seconded.
I second the motion.
Okay. Could Mr. Tima please read out the what the text of the motion was?
So I didn't write it down. Training for additional education for individuals in primary and secondary education along the lines of historical, philosophical, political, economic, and social issues from a
So you'll
variety.
have to start from which types of education. I can't type that
Historical.
unfortunately.
Philosophical, political, economic, social issues from a variety of perspectives.
I thank the member. Would you like to speak to that amendment now?
Yes, I think it's all well and good if we have these amendments if there is transparency. But if individuals don't actually know about these things, for example, the people in this room, we all have the base knowledge to understand these concepts, right? I believe we all do. I believe everyone in this room is highly intelligent. But the problem is not every person has interest all the time to learn these topics in their own free time. And our education system is woeful. Like, the only reason I know anything about politics is because as a year 8, I just didn't listen to any of my teachers in any class and just read political essays because I was weird. I think that's a problem with high school and education in general, is that we don't teach these basic building blocks that produce a good person. It's all great teaching someone math skills, it's all great teaching someone how to write, but if they don't have the moral or the mental ability to understand and debate topics with themselves and with others, and to just essentially pick them apart and build it back together and the foundation, there's no point in telling them anything. Information that cannot be processed is useless information.
I thank the honourable member. The question is that the amendment is accepted. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hands. The amendment has been accepted. We will add another subsection to the motion. So I recommends that education should be provided for individuals in primary and secondary education for historical, philosophical, political, economic, and social issues from a variety of perspectives. We will accept one final amendment. Mr. Priest.
Thank you, Chair. The Honourable Lachlan Priest. I move that this House creates another amendment, which I guess would be J. Notes that it is the responsibility of the government to create adequate employment for young citizens and citizens in general. To create adequate employment for young citizens and citizens in general.
Is the motion seconded? Would you like to speak to the
Just briefly, in today's society, to be able to have a livelihood either requires to either inherit wealth or to have employment. And as a government's role to look after citizens, I believe it is a government's role to create employment.
I thank the honourable member. The question is that the amendment is accepted. Those in favour, please raise your hands. Those opposed, please raise your hands. The amendment has been accepted. We've now added subsection J. Notes that it is the responsibility of the government to provide adequate employment for young citizens and citizens in general. The time for amendments has now expired. I will now return control of the chamber to the presiding officer.
I call upon the speaker.
I echo some of the thoughts of my colleagues who have already talked, in that I'm very pleased to see this bill proposed, and I'm pleased to see what we've done with it and how we've all reacted. But I do suspect that from some of my colleagues, some of my friends here that have already done Youth Parliament, that this is not the first time that young people have kindly asked the government, could you please listen to us a little more? I'm excited to see some of the amendments put through specifically asks for a representative or direct involvement of young people with the government. I think this is a very strong bill, and I think it shows that so many of us have such important things to say. I just wish it was heard more. I echo what has already been said, and that we should do this, we should pass it, and we should make sure that it's the strongest motion that we can pass. But whether it's listened to or whether it is not, depends on whether we remember this and whether we choose to act in our own lives, henceforth, in conjunction with passing this motion. And I encourage us all to do so, and I encourage politicians, if they ever happen to listen to this, to do so as well.
Thank you, honourable member. I call upon another speaker. The honourable member closest to me.
Chair, the Honourable Saksham Pradhan. I was going to say this as an amendment, but I ran out of time. So, essentially, all I see in this motion are mere words. Too long have the youth heard empty words from the government. It is time the government states more than just soft words and promises to the youth that they will keep their word. And I guess it can't be an amendment anymore, but I implore the government to consider this, that instead of just stating this, it should rather read, the House promises to promote the following issues by noting, by acknowledging, by noting, by acknowledging, by recommending, by recommending. In this way, we can see that the government is not just stating words, but that they are promising to the youth. Because far too long have the government promised us so many things, but then they just turn their back on it. So I want the government to make real change. I wish. So I want the government to make real change by promising to keep these, by promising to keep their words as stated in this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable member. I call upon the speaker. The honourable Amy.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Amy Mayer. Now, I know I'm probably going to add on to what all of the honourable members who, that have spoken before me, but I am just sick and tired of the government just not listening to us. We have been, as young people, we have been taking time out of our education, out of our schooling, to organise, to run, and to take part in protests in our own city, and they still do not listen to us. Do everything out of their own greed, and it's just become so frustrating. And the fact that we even have to sit in here, stand here, and speak about this today, and obviously there are so many amendments made, which I do second the motion for every one of them. The fact that people are able to recognise so many flaws within our government is it's unbelievable. The fact that the government is unable to provide so much for young people in South Australia is absolutely just atrocious, and I implore everybody in this chamber today to vote for this motion.
do still have a little bit of time, so I think we might actually allow a vote on Suction's amendment, if you would like to still make it. Yeah, if you'd like to stand up and read out what you would like to change.
Chair, the Honourable Sachin. I move to amend the following passage, or rather include the following passage, that a member to move that this House promises to promote the following issues by noting, by acknowledging, by noting,
We might read them out one at a time so I can tell them.
Alright, well, it's just like the first few words.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll read them out. By noting that the big issues, so we're starting with A.
No, so just, so this House promises.
Promises to promote the following issues by, and just the every first word, just changing it to an in. Noting. Yeah.
So you would just change the format of the verb.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Is the motion seconded? Would you like to continue to speak on that, or did you? Yep. Okay. The question is that the amendment is accepted. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Oh, sorry. All those in favour raise your hands, please. Any opposed, please raise your hands. Okay, the amendment has been accepted. All of the first words in each line of in each subsection of the motion will be changed to the active verb form. All right, we will return to regular speeches.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Jackson O'Leary. I recall my previous year of Youth Parliament, which a few of you here were around to witness. It was a motion on climate change, and I'm going to parrot what I said then. A lot of the changes that will have to be made in the current day for future generations will require a sacrifice in our modern times. We may not have all of the comforts and resources that we have today in order for us to prepare for the future. I will recall a quick cite from a biblical text. Pretty sure a lot of people are familiar with the story of Noah's Ark, in that Noah was instructed to build a large ark in order to avoid a flood. In reference from that to modern times, instead of building houses out of the wood, we could build the ark. Today we instead build an ark for tomorrow. Just to paraphrase again, this may not be comfortable for our future generations. It may not be comfortable today or a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I call upon Speaker. The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member.
Sorry. Please continue.
A person's mental health affects how they feel, think and behave and relate to others. Also, a mental illness covers a spectrum of disorders that vary in how severe they are and how they last. According to the Beyond Blue website, half of all the mental health conditions we experience at some point in our lives will have started by age 14. Over 75% of mental health problems occur before the age of 25. 1 in 7 people aged 4 to 17 years experience a mental health condition in any given year. 13.9% of children and young people from 4 to 17 met the criteria for a diagnosis of a mental disorder in the last 12 months, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Young people are less likely than any other age group to seek professional help. Only 31% of young women and 13% of young men with mental health problems had sought any professional help. These statistics are chaotic in my opinion. 25 to 35% of people have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, according to the Black Dog Institute, with high levels of worry and anxiety. Mental health is a serious issue for young people in South Australia, and to acknowledge this is the first step in addressing this great concern.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I call upon the Speaker. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Monu. I would like to speak about the language that is often used by politicians to describe young people. Apparently, we are the stars of the future, and we don't have a voice now. I would like to echo the voices that were, the things that were shared before about the youth representative at the Parliament. And I think that is really important, because we have a voice now. We are not the future, we are now.
I thank the Honourable Member. I call upon the Speaker. The Honourable Member for this delivery.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Emily Harwood. This motion ultimately only catches us up to where we should have been ages ago. You have been asking for their say for years now. Protesting, signing petitions and going on school strikes. We have been requesting our say in government and for the government to hear us for years. Which is why I encourage everyone to consider this bill deeply, as it is only a stepping stone to where we should have been already. We are only starting to make steps to where we should have been years ago, and where other places such as the UN have been starting to get representatives that we should have had years ago.
I thank the Honourable Member. I call upon the Speaker. The Honourable Anna.
Our young people are a community who have come together in a time of extreme crisis. Throughout this year, we have seen bushfire protests, Black Lives Matter protests, climate protests, all led by our young people. Quite frankly, the time has come to confront our future, and it seems to us that the young people are the only ones brave enough to do so. The government continue to bury their heads in the sand. It's time the government wakes up and starts listening to us. The world is at a tipping point. This year will have political, social, and environmental impacts that the government can't even imagine. But us, as young people, we don't have to imagine it. We can see it happening in front of us. We can see what our lives are becoming. We can see the future that we will have to live through, and we are terrified. The government needs to wake up, because the house is burning down, and if we burn, well, they burn with us.
Can I ask for another here for the Honourable Member? Thank you, Honourable Member. I call upon the Speaker. The Honourable Harry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Harry Purcell. I'd just like to ask the House that when we go on in our future lives, if any of you become a positive views, sorry, I'll use proper language, if any of you guys, if any of the members of Parliament or just policymakers in general, I beg you to listen to what you're saying to yourself now, because something must click. Because all the members of Parliament now were once young people, and they probably had grievances. But now they don't listen. Something clicked. Something approached them that made them go, oh, well, young people did matter, and I complained back then, but more important things happen now. I beg you that when you guys, when even you've got a future, I'm not the future ahead of yourself, but even if you, Mr. Speaker, and everyone in this chamber who goes on to become policymakers or have influence in our society, that they don't forget what they're saying now, to make sure that young people always have a say, to always put young people first. Even when you start to, even when everyone in this chamber starts to get those those ideas which seem to infect the minds of current members of Parliament. When those ideas start to encroach, you reject them and make sure that you listen to young people. Everyone listens to young people. I don't know why I'm saying a lot of you. But yes, just make sure that it doesn't get you to. Make sure it gets no one. Just resist whatever is affecting the current Parliament. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member. Two more speeches. That's all on the speaker. The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Ashley Fisher. Before I begin, I'm hearing everyone's speeches. They are very inspiring, we can all agree, yes? Unfortunately, I'm going to break the status quo ever so slightly. I asked everyone to listen. I'm not expecting everyone to agree because seemingly everyone here is on the same position. I'm a bit different. I agree that this motion is great and that we have a voice. This is what we want. That's our end goal. But we also can't forget that we should be the one controlling our own lives and the future problems, and I believe the government should be limited to this. As it almost sounds controversial in a way, especially in this day and age, where for me to say I don't believe it's the role for the government to fix every single problem that faces our lives, that's just what I agree with. I don't believe the government should be the one making the jobs. I believe the market will. I do not believe that climate change is the biggest issue. Of course, it's an overbearing issue we should all be concerned with, and many people probably just look at me going, what the heck, Ashley? But there are big issues in the world, and the government isn't always the answer to this. A major issue, but I believe it's an issue we can all individually solve one by one. I don't believe it's the government's role to go to every person saying, you need to believe this. Controversial, I understand, and I think it's the little things that make the biggest impact. Now, we're all going with politicians. I understand we all think they have a set mind track. This could be true, but I want everyone to look outside now and look how lucky we are to live in Australia. We have a big issue, but if the issues we're talking about, of course I'm saying these issues are big, climate change and mental health, don't get me wrong, they're big issues, but other countries have overbearing issues that impact on freedom of speech, in the way we can interact with each other, in the way we can communicate. And I think the issues we're talking about now, they are big issues, especially to us as youth. I think we're in a lucky place already, and we have to keep in mind politicians need to please all, and youth is a big part of that, we can all agree. Keeping that in mind, I'll go on to COVID. Now, we can all agree, big issue, correct? But we've in other countries in the world, and how lucky are we? South Australia. We are so lucky. Is anyone infected in here? Politicians, they make bills and they don't always listen to youth. Even look at us today when we were debating bills. No bill was a simple smooth line. We had to make compromises which impacted certain groups and affected others. Politicians make laws, again I know this is controversial, especially when everyone else is talking on the one side here. Nothing's going to be smooth and there's always unintended consequences for everything. As youth especially, I'm not saying we don't see these unexpected consequences, but I think we only look at the government side. I think we as youth, if we want to start enacting laws in the future, chance are for generation 10, we might cause issues that we can't even think of at the moment. I think there's nothing I can really add to this motion because, as I said, it's brilliant. It has what we want, but we can't take away that we are the ones that solve the problems, not the government, and compromises may have to be made. So, to finalise with this, we are the ones to solve the problems. Australia isn't a government. It's made up of every single one of you people. Every person can solve a problem, and I believe we all should be empowered to do so.
Thank you, Honourable Member. On the final speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask everyone in this House to reflect on how hard it was for us to amend this motion. It wasn't hard whatsoever. We saw this and we knew exactly what we wanted to change. Every single moment in Parliament, in political parties, where they're not approaching us or they're not acknowledging issues that are so glaringly obvious, they could just ask their own kids. Most of them have kids, ask their own grandparents that aren't in Parliament. They would know. Everyone knows the solutions. Every single moment the issues aren't being dealt with, they are making a conscious decision not to deal with them. So I want everyone here to go out and realise that when we take political actions and when we make a change, that the government is not doing that and they're consciously not doing that. Hopefully this is an opportunity for them to make a change, to realise everyone here could look at this for moments and knew exactly what was needed.
Appreciate the honourable member's comments. The time for this discussion has expired. Before the question is put, I will ask the clerk to repeat the motion for the chamber.
The motion reads as follows. This House promises to promote intergenerational equity by A. Noting that the big issues young South Australians care deeply about, such as intergenerational poverty, climate change, youth unemployment and mental health conditions and challenges, have not been adequately tackled or made transparent enough by the short-term decisions made by previous generations. B. Acknowledging the challenges faced by policymakers responding to intergenerational global issues like the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change and the need to look beyond short-term solutions. C. Noting the lack of intergenerational consideration regarding new and future policy development in South Australia. D. Acknowledging the need to work together to give current and future generations a good quality of life by thinking about long-term impacts of new policy and legislation. E. Recommending a statewide consultation process with children, young people, community members and policy developers for new and future policies. F. Recommending instituting a Future Generations Bill which ensures the intergenerational sustainability, well-being and transparency of new policies developed in South Australia with young people directly involved in its creation. G. Recommending an appointment of a youth advisor to the Government of South Australia. H. Acknowledging youth as the primary members of society who will bear the consequences of new and future policies. I. Recommending that education should be provided for individuals in primary and secondary education for historical, philosophical, political, economic, social issues from a variety of perspectives. And finally, J. Noting that it is the responsibility of the government to provide adequate employment for young citizens and citizens in general. It's a rather long motion, but there we are. The question is that the motion be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. I think we will do a show of hands just so we have totals. I think we'll just start. Anybody who's voting no on this motion, raise your hand.
Really gonna make myself abstain.
Right, so that's 1, 2, 3. Right, and I will just subtract that from everybody else that's in the room.
What about abstain?
Would anybody like to abstain on this? Okay. So I'll get those numbers again. Anybody wishing to vote no, please raise your hand. Anybody wishing to abstain, please raise your hand. Alright, and I will then assume that everybody else, by process of elimination, is therefore voting yes. So the motion has passed. With currently unidentified number of ayes, 3 noes and 3 abstentions. Well done. So that is the end of that first deliberative motion. Can I just say, from just sitting in this chair listening to all of you,